Slade Mercer first noticed her in the silent hour preceding the dawn, a time when the world seemed to hold its breath. Just as the dim light cast everything in shades of grey and stillness, a profound sorrow seeping from the very soil, she was there at the border of his corral. She was barefoot, her small dress rigid with grime and blood, clutching a large, lumpy bundle to her chest as if a single wrong move might cause it to disintegrate. He remained on his porch, initially not moving or speaking, a mug of coffee growing cold in his grip. The steam curled upwards and dissipated, much like everything else in this desolate landscape. The young girl did not flee. She shed no tears. Her hair was a tangled mess, streaked by the sun, and her face, God preserve him, carried a burden of age it had no right to bear. She couldn't have been more than 6 or 7, yet her eyes held the quiet knowing of one who had witnessed too much and learned to stay silent about it. "I'm not here to take anything," she stated, her voice as faint as the wind whistling through the fence. "Please don't use your gun on me. I needed to get them to safety." Slade rose to his feet. The porch planks groaned beneath his weight, and the sound made the girl flinch, though she held her ground. He traversed the dusty yard with deliberate slowness, taking care not to stir up clouds that might frighten her. He was a tall, scarred, and reticent man, and he understood not to approach a trembling creature with haste. He halted a mere foot away, his gaze falling to the bundle. The girl's arms instinctively tightened. "They're small. Very small. They don't make a sound. They hardly move at all." Slade knelt down. As the bundle shifted, a flap of the linen covering fell away, revealing not one, but 3 tiny faces. Their lips were purple, almost blue, their eyes were sealed shut, as delicate as petals touched by frost. He refrained from asking where she had come from or whose children they were. He simply extended his hands, rough but unwavering, and the girl relinquished her hold. Her arms fell to her sides as if some internal support had finally snapped. Slade stood once more, the 3 infants now cradled in his arms. He could feel the faint rise and fall of their chests. It was barely there, but it was life. He turned toward his cabin, nodding with his chin. The girl didn't stir. "Do you have any food?" she whispered. "Not for me, but my mama." Her sentence trailed off as she followed him. The cabin's interior was modest but retained a warmth from the fire that had burned through the night. Slade gently placed the triplets on a wool blanket near the hearth, checking their breathing again. One let out a wheeze, but it was a breath, and for now, that was sufficient. The girl lingered by the entrance, as if she anticipated being thrown out at any moment. He poured some warm water into a tin basin. "Wash up," he said softly. "I'll tend to them." She gave a single nod and drifted like a phantom toward the water. That morning, as the sun painted the mountains gold and the valley floor a burnished copper, Slade worked in silence. He cleaned the infants' faces and found bottles to warm milk in a tin cup over the fire. The girl observed his every action, committing it to memory as if she might be called upon to save someone else the next day. He glanced at her, struggling for the right words. "What's your name?" "Tessa Culpepper." He nodded. "I'm Slade." That was the extent of their exchange. Later, he discovered her curled on the rug by the fire, her eyes wide and unblinking, simply watching the babies breathe. "Do they have names?" he inquired. Tessa shook her head. "Mama didn't get the chance." Slade felt a sharp pang. "They are still alive." A heavy silence followed. Perhaps that evening, Slade saddled his horse and rode toward town, leaving the girls sleeping. He didn't bother locking the door. The general store was quiet. Miss Tilda, the proprietor, cocked an eyebrow when he requested milk, fresh linens, a tin of healing salve, and 3 sets of cloth diapers. She didn't pry, but her eyes narrowed with the kind of perception women have when they sense a story unfolding. "Storm rolling in?" she asked. "Nope. HM. Could have sworn I saw it settled on your shoulders." Slade said nothing, paid with coins, and departed. By the time he got back, one of the babies was crying, a frail, hoarse sound, as if she hadn't yet learned how to properly ask for anything. Tessa held her but didn't bounce or rock her, just stared at the tiny form, terrified of doing something wrong. Slade took the infant, tucked her against his chest, and paced slowly across the floorboards, the lantern light flickering on the log walls. He didn't register when Tessa finally succumbed to sleep, but she awoke with a jolt at midnight. Slade was seated by the fire, a baby in his arms, both of them perfectly still. The wind had risen outside, a gentle murmur through the trees like old men sharing secrets. Tessa sat up. "Do you think they're going to die?" Slade looked at her. "They're trying not to." A pause. Then Tessa whispered, "Papa tried to bury them." Slade remained silent. Tessa's voice, brittle and thin, continued. "Mama shoved me out the door. She said, 'Run to the ranch.' The quiet one. The one who keeps bees. He won't send you away." Slade swallowed hard. "You have a last name." Culpepper. He tensed almost imperceptibly. Everyone in the valley knew of Clayton Culpepper. A harsh man and a mean drunk who owned land east of the ridge, but whom no one ever visited. The sheriff's unofficial policy was to let sleeping snakes lie unless they bit first. Slade nodded slowly. "Got any other family in town?" "No, sir." "Are you cold?" She shook her head. "You can sleep." "I'll stay up." Tessa didn't move. "He hit Mama." Slade gazed into the flames. She kept saying she was sorry, like it was her fault still. Slade offered no words. She bled on the floor for hours. And when he said she'd given him 3 more cursed girls, he went for the shovel. Slade shut his eyes. When he finally looked back at Tessa, she was trembling but her eyes were dry. "There's no crying in the dust," she murmured, a phrase that sounded like it had been repeated by her mother many times. He got up, took a quilt from his cot, and wrapped it around her shoulders. She flinched at his touch, then relaxed into the warmth like a child finding a patch of sun. A long moment stretched between them, filled only by the crackle of the fire and the breathing of 4 souls unsure of what would come next. Then came 3 soft knocks on the door, too gentle for the sheriff, too steady for a drunk. Slade gestured for Tessa to stay put. He walked slowly to the door, his rifle resting nearby. He opened it a crack. A woman stood there barefoot, her dress stained with dark, dried blood. Her hair was plastered to her face in wet strands. Her arms hung uselessly at her sides, but her eyes still held a spark of defiance. It was her. "Lena May Culpepper." "Are they?" Lena's voice cracked. "They're alive," Slade said. Lena collapsed, and Slade caught her just before she hit the floor. Inside, Tessa stood frozen for a moment, then let the quilt fall and rushed to her mother's side, dropping to her knees. Slade gently lowered Lena to the floor by the fire. Her breathing was shallow and her skin felt cold, but her lips managed a faint curve when she felt Tessa's small hand. "You brought them here," she murmured. "I did," Tessa whispered back. "And I told him." "Told him what?" Tessa glanced from Slade to her mother. "That this time," she said, her voice firm, "we're not going back." Slade stood over them, a silhouette against the firelight. He looked toward the door. The wind outside was changing direction. Somewhere out beyond the hills, a man was waking up to find his daughters gone. And this time, he would come looking. By morning, Lena was still breathing, though her lips were cracked and her skin had a gray, ashen pallor. Slade kept the fire roaring until the small cabin pulsed with warmth. Each time one of the triplets whimpered in their basket, Tessa jumped as if it might be their final sound. Outside, the land awakened in a hushed, watchful quiet. Sunlight slanted softly across the parched ground, illuminating dust motes that spun like unspoken secrets in the air. The wind seemed to be holding its breath again, waiting to see how this particular story would unfold. Slade boiled water and steeped a weak tea from crushed mint leaves. He carefully poured a little over Lena's lips, supporting her head with one calloused hand. Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. Tessa sat huddled in a blanket near the fire, her knees drawn up to her chest. She hadn't said a word since the previous night, but her eyes were alert, following Slade's movements, watching the rise and fall of the baby's chests, and frequently glancing at the door. He could see she was waiting for someone to arrive, not with anticipation, but with dread. Do you trust me yet? He asked gently, crouching beside her. Tessa looked at him, her expression unreadable, but her voice was a small whisper. Mama did, that was all that mattered. Mid-morning, Slade hitched his horse. He needed diapers, milk, gauze, and information. The girl stood at the cabin door as he departed, one hand resting on the frame as if she'd lock it if she had the strength. He didn't need to tell her to keep it shut, she already knew. In town, sunlight glinted off the church steeple as wagons rumbled over the hard-packed dirt between storefronts. Slade's arrival caused heads to turn, first slowly, then all at once, like cattle spooked by thunder. Miss Tilda raised an eyebrow the moment he entered her shop. 2 visits in 1 week. Lord have mercy, are you getting sick or getting soft? Neither, he replied. Need baby cloth, more milk, salve, and small boots. She turned deliberately, gathering tins and cotton, and placed them on the counter with a clatter that was more pointed than necessary. This for those little ones folks saw you tending to yesterday. He offered no response. She squinted. Heard they ain't yours, they weren't. Then why? Slade met her gaze without flinching. Because they're alive. Miss Tilda let out a long sigh, like a winded mule. Lord help me. You always were the quiet, bleeding heart type. There ain't no law that says you have to take in every stray. He slid coins across the wooden counter. Is there a law that says I shouldn't? She grew still. No, Slade. But there's a man making the rounds, asking about his missing girls. Name of Culpepper. Spat whiskey when I told him I hadn't seen them. Slade held her gaze. Don't mention my name. Tilda's expression softened. Never would he left the store with his sack of goods, but he felt eyes on him all the way to the edge of town. Clayton was awake now, and he was hunting. Back at the cabin, the wind had grown stronger. The babies were quiet, nestled in an old wicker basket Slade once used for honeycomb. One of them blinked slowly, as if the very act of opening her eyes was a risk. Tessa had swept the porch clean with a bundle of sagebrush tied with string. Mama always said cleaning is safer than praying, she said without looking up from her task. Slade set down the supplies and said nothing, though he noticed the slight quiver in her chin after she spoke. Inside, Lena was stirring. She awoke in stages, first her mouth, then her eyes, and finally, a deep breath. She tried to sit up but winced and fell back against the pillow. Tessa rushed to her side, her hands fluttering anxiously. Mama, do you want a drink? I boiled water. I kept it hot, just like you taught me. Lena's fingers brushed her daughter's cheek. You remembered Slade watched them for a moment before stepping outside to grant them some privacy. He walked the perimeter of his corral, checking the fence posts and noting the ones that had been weakened by the last storm. Each step was a distraction, a place for his mind to go that wasn't filled with the hollow sound of a baby's breath or the sight of a woman's cracked lips. When he returned, Lena was sitting upright, trembling but fully conscious. Her hair had been combed through with fingers and water. Her eyes found his and held them. You saved us, she said. He shook his head. Tessa did. Lena reached for her daughter's hand and squeezed it. She's got grit. No girl should have to need that much, Slade replied softly. For a time, silence settled over the room. Then Lena looked around the sparse cabin. You live alone. He nodded. Why did you let her in? He met her gaze. Because she was alone, her eyes welled with tears, but she blinked them back. Outside, the wind whipped dust from the porch. Lena tried to stand but groaned, clutching her ribs. Slade moved to assist her, but she waved him away. I need to walk. If I stop moving, I'll forget I'm still alive, he nodded, watching as she took 2 unsteady steps toward the fire, where she stood staring at her sleeping babies for a long while. They don't have names, she whispered. Tessa spoke up. I was thinking we could let them name themselves. When they're strong enough. Lena managed a faint smile. Then they'll pick something wild. That would be just fine, Slade said. The world could use more wild girls who survive. Later, Slade made a stew with carrots and dried venison. Tessa assisted him, standing on a wooden crate by the stove. She didn't speak much, but she kept glancing toward Lena and the triplets, as if she were counting her blessings before they could vanish. That night, Slade found Tessa sitting on the porch, barefoot again, her dress now clean but still torn at the hem. She clutched a wooden spoon like it was a talisman against nightmares. "You sleeping out here?" he asked. She shrugged. "I can hear better when the wind is talking." He sat down beside her, his knees creaking. "My papa," she said abruptly, "he said girls are bad luck." "Said God cursed us." Slade didn't respond, just waited. He said Mama shamed him, giving him 3 more mouths to feed that couldn't carry the Culpepper name. "What do you think?" Slade asked gently. "I think," she hesitated, "I think God didn't curse us. I think Papa just needed to blame someone smaller than him." Slade exhaled slowly. No child is meant to carry a burden that heavy. Tessa glanced sideways at him. "But we do, don't we?" He couldn't argue with that. That night, Slade stayed awake long after the fire had dwindled to embers. He sat beside the basket, watching the babies twitch in their sleep, their tiny fists curling. Lena breathed heavily in the bed behind him, her arms reaching toward her children even in her slumber. The wind tapped lightly at the window panes. Somewhere out in the valley, a lone rider moved under the moonlight, without a lantern, guided only by the creak of leather and the slow, measured breath of a horse. And in the cabin, Slade turned his head toward the sound, his jaw tight. He recognized that rhythm, the gait of that kind of man, a saddle that groaned under too much hate, a boot heel that dug into the earth like it was digging a grave. Clayton Culpepper was close. The triplet stirred before the dawn, a flutter of tiny fists, a shallow intake of breath, a sound like a hiccup wrapped in sorrow. Slade bent low, his hand gently resting over their chests, counting the rise and fall as the first hint of blue morning light touched the cabin walls. "They're warmer today," Tessa whispered from behind him. He glanced over his shoulder to see her already awake, sitting on the floor with her chin on her knees. "You didn't sleep." "I don't really do that much," he didn't push. Some children learn early that rest is a luxury, that closing your eyes means something precious might slip away. He touched one of the baby's feet, soft, wrinkled, impossibly small. "They're holding on." "They're strong," Tessa said with certainty. "Mama said girls born from pain carry all their mother's fight." Slade just looked at her. She was 6 years old and already spoke with the wisdom of someone who had been broken apart and pieced back together from ash. The cabin smelled of wood smoke, milk, and the old story soaked into its timbers. Lena lay still on the cot, her face to the wall, her spine curved like a question mark. The bruises on her jaw had deepened to a darker purple overnight. When Slade brought her a cup of tea, she didn't stir. "Is she awake?" Tessa asked, sliding from her spot on the floor. Slade nodded. "She's pretending not to be." He set the tin mug on the floor beside the cot and crouched down. Lena's lips barely moved. "Are they okay?" Breathing better than yesterday, Lena gave an almost imperceptible nod, her voice as thin as paper. "I dreamed they were born dead." I saw the holes he dug. Her eyes finally opened. "You got them out?" "They didn't cry when they came into the world. Just looked at me like they already knew this place didn't want them." Slade's voice was firm. "They looked at you because you're their beginning." That brought moisture to Lena's eyes, though no tears fell. "I don't have anything left to give." Tessa crept closer. "You still have your hands, Mama. You can hold them." Lena reached out slowly, her bones seeming to click beneath her skin. Slade carefully passed the triplets to her, one by one. Lena cradled her daughters as if she had forgotten the feel of softness, as if the world had only ever taught her how to endure pain. "They don't have names," Lena repeated, even quieter this time. Tessa looked from her mother to Slade. "Maybe that's good. It means they can choose for themselves when they're strong enough to speak." Lena's lips twitched into what might have been the ghost of a smile. "You're too wise for 6. Slade added more wood to the fire. The wind outside tapped at the windows, insistent, but the cabin remained enveloped in a thick, wool-like stillness. Lena fed the babies with a dropper Slade had fashioned from a quill, her fingers trembling. Every so often, she would pause and whisper something under her breath, soft, broken words only a mother could comprehend. Slade stood by the window, his gaze fixed on the distant ridge. The valley was unnervingly quiet. He knew men in town were whispering. He'd seen it the day before at the feed store, the sideways glances from the sheriff, the way voices dropped when he walked by. Clayton Culpepper was asking questions. "Ever think about running?" Slade asked, his back still to the room. Lena didn't look up from the babies. "I ran once. Ended up right back with him." "What about now?" She hesitated. "I can't run with two little ones." "3," Slade corrected gently. "And you're not alone this time." For silence stretched between them. Then, she asked the question that hung in the air. "Are you going to stand between us and him?" "I already am." Lena didn't thank him. Instead, she just whispered, "He doesn't forget things." Especially not shame. Slade's jaw tightened as he thought of the bruise on Lena's cheek and the tiny ribs he could feel beneath the baby's skin. "Then we'll make this something worth him remembering." Later that morning, Tessa followed Slade to the barn. She was quiet, watching him chop wood, check the fences, and brush down the horses. She held the nails for him as he mended the trough and handed him the rope when he needed it. She never asked if she could help, she just did. "You always this quiet?" Slade asked. "Only when I'm scared." "You scared now?" She shrugged. "Less than I was." He handed her a half-finished wooden carving, something that might have been a horse or a deer. "You can finish it. Just keep the blade away from your fingers." For a brief moment, her eyes lit up. "You made this?" He nodded. Her face fell slightly. "My papa only ever made fists." Slade didn't flinch. "Your hands can make something different." Inside the cabin, Lena stood for the first time without assistance. Her knees buckled and her hand gripped the bedpost like a lifeline, but she remained on her feet. The triplets slept in a wooden crate lined with old shirts and wool, their tiny bodies curled like commas. The cabin smelled of fresh bread, Tessa's handiwork, and burning pine. When Slade re-entered, Lena turned to him. She was pale, her hair tucked behind her ears, freckles visible through the fading bruises. "I stood up," she said, her voice scratchy but proud. "I see that. It hurt like sin. Then you're healing." Tessa burst through the door just then, holding up her finished carving. "Look what I did. I made it a horse." "Sort of." Lena smiled, a genuine smile this time. "That's beautiful." Tessa turned and beamed at Slade. "That means she's really back." Slade leaned his weight against the door frame. "Yeah, she is." But even as he spoke, his eyes kept drifting toward the window. The wind had shifted again, carrying the kind of stillness that precedes a loud, hard sound. And in his chest, a heavy feeling settled. That night, Slade laid his rifle by the door and slept with one boot on. The horses were restless in the barn, snorting at shadows. Lena lay awake on the cot, her arms encircling the babies, her voice a faint, humming lullaby. "What's she singing?" Tessa whispered from her rug on the floor. Slade listened. The words were too soft to make out, but the melody was low and ancient, something likely passed down from her own mother's lips long ago. "A promise," he said. "She's making them one." Tessa curled closer to the dying fire. "I think I like it here." Slade's voice was quiet. "Me too." But by the next morning, a single rider had left the saloon and taken the east road. His name was Clayton Culpepper, and he was already closer than they knew. The first warning was the horses. Not the sound of hooves, not yet, but the way Slade's bay gelding shifted its weight in the barn, its ears pinned back as if recalling something cruel. Even the chickens fell silent that morning, their usual clucking replaced by a thick quiet that spread across the dirt like fog. Slade woke before sunrise, as always, but he didn't light the fire. He stood barefoot on the cabin floor, letting his eyes adjust to the pale light filtering through the window slats. The wind wasn't howling, it was a low, steady whisper, as if it knew a name he hadn't spoken aloud in years. Clayton. Lena sat up on the cot, her hair still damp from the basin Tessa had filled for her. The bruises had begun to fade into mottled shades of gold and purple, but her eyes hadn't softened. They were harder now, clearer. "He's close," Slade stated. Lena didn't ask how he knew. She simply nodded and pulled the triplets closer, wrapping a shawl around them all. Tessa stood in the doorway, a spoon in her hand, a half-eaten biscuit on her plate. "What happens now?" "We get ready," Slade said. Quietly. They moved without panic, with the calm of people long accustomed to living in the path of storms. Slade showed Tessa where to hide if someone knocked, how to lift the baby's basket and slip through the trapdoor concealed beneath a faded rug and a chest of dried beans. Tessa listened, her eyes wide and serious. "Have they ever been in the dark like that?" Slade asked. "They were born in it," Tessa whispered. Lena moved more slowly that morning, but with an unwavering purpose. She folded clothes into bundles and placed a knife under her pillow. She hadn't asked for his permission, she no longer needed it. She was a mother, and the part of her that asked for things had died when her husband first dug a grave for her children. By noon, a rider passed the old creek bed. Slade watched him from the ridge, his eyes narrowed under the brim of his hat. He couldn't make out the face, but he recognized the horse, a stallion with a torn left ear. Slade himself had branded that ear for winters ago, when a drunken raving Clayton had shown up at the edge of his ranch, demanding a loan Slade had never offered. Clayton was near. Slade didn't return to the cabin immediately. He sat on a rock overlooking the valley, his hands clasped and his head bowed low. The mountains loomed behind him like patient gods, waiting to see what kind of man he would choose to be. When he got back, Lena was washing one of the babies in warm water, her sleeves rolled up to her elbows. Tessa stood beside her, carefully drying a cloth. The fire burned with a steady, calming flame. A strange peace had settled over the room, not the absence of fear, but a readiness for it. "I saw him," Slade said. Lena's hand stilled. "How long?" "An hour." "Maybe less," she nodded. "He'll ride in like he owns the place." Slade loaded his rifle. "Not today." The sun began its slow descent, stretching long shadows across the pasture. The air grew thick and sharp with the smell of dust, the way it does right before a thunderstorm. "Do you remember the first time you met him?" Slade asked Lena as they stood together outside. She didn't look at him. He smiled when he lied. Slade nodded. She continued, "I was 16. I thought he was a man. He was just a wound walking around in a suit." Her voice hardened. "And now, I'm tired of bleeding for him." They stood side by side, both facing the road as the sky behind them blushed with the first hues of evening. Tessa came outside, holding something small. "I made one of them a name," she said softly. She handed Slade a piece of wood she had carved into the shape of a tiny cradle. On the bottom, she had painstakingly scratched a single word, "Mercy." Lena took it, her fingers trembling. "That's what she is." "She deserves to be called something," Tessa said. No more silence. Slade nodded slowly, then tucked the small carving into his pocket. They heard the horse before they saw the rider. It was a slow, deliberate cadence, not a gallop, but the approach of a man who believed the world owed him obedience. Clayton Culpepper rode into view with a shotgun slung across his back and a sneer already fixed on his face. His eye scanned the porch and landed on Lena. "Well," he said, his voice deceptively calm, "ain't this a sight?" No one replied. "I've come for what's mine," he declared. Lena clutched the babies tighter. Slade stepped forward. "They're not yours." Clayton laughed, dismounting with an arrogant swing of his leg. "You wearing a badge now, Slade?" "No." "Then you best step aside." "No." Clayton's gaze shifted past him, locking onto Tessa. "You told, didn't you?" Tessa didn't flinch. Her chin lifted. I told the truth. Clayton's face contorted with rage. You'll regret that. Slade didn't reach for his rifle. He didn't have to. Lena took a single step forward, her voice soft but clear. Her name is Mercy. Clayton blinked. What? You tried to bury her nameless. She lives now. She's Mercy. Clayton's mouth twisted, and he looked as though he might speak, but before he could, Slade reached into his coat pocket, pulled out the carved name, and set it gently on the porch rail. You don't scare us anymore, he said. Clayton's fingers twitched toward his belt, and in that single, suspended moment, the entire world held its breath. Clayton moved first, a twitch of his shoulder signaling the start of a draw. It was a slow, deliberate motion, filled with the cruelty of a man who never had to be fast because fear had always done the work for him. But Slade didn't flinch. He stepped off the porch, positioning himself between the shotgun and the family, his boots crunching on the gravel like warning shots in the silence. You touch that iron, Slade said, his voice low and dangerous, and I promise you, you won't touch the ground again. Clayton smirked, his eyes wild. You think I'm scared of you, ranch boy? Slade's voice didn't rise. No. But you ought to be scared of her. He tilted his head toward Lena. She stood tall now, thin, trembling, but unbowed. Her shawl had fallen away, and with her babies in her arms and the firelight from the open cabin glowing behind her, she looked like an avenging angel. Clayton's mouth curled in disgust. You think that broken woman is going to stop me? She's already outlived you, Slade said simply. You just haven't noticed yet. Clayton's hand dropped to the butt of his pistol, but something else moved faster. A flash of red, a flicker of motion from the porch. It was Tessa, barefoot and dirt-smudged, holding a lit lantern in her shaking hands. She threw it. The glass shattered at Clayton's feet. Kerosene bloomed across the dust, and a flame caught, not with an explosion, but with something worse, a slow, dancing burn that curled as if it were alive, hungry for anything cruel. Clayton stumbled back, his boots catching in the fire as it hissed up his legs. He cursed and flailed, slapping at his smoldering coat. His horse reared and bolted, tearing the reins from the post and disappearing into the darkening hills. Lena stepped down from the porch, her arms wrapped around her children, her eyes locked on the man who had dug their graves. You wanted to name them nothing, she said, her voice ringing with newfound power. You thought that would make them disappear. Clayton's breath came in ragged gasps, his face streaked with soot and his coat smoking. You hit me. You cursed them. You broke things that never belonged to you, Lena continued, her voice growing stronger with every word. Clayton snarled, they're mine. No, she said. They are Mercy, and they are not yours. Clayton raised his shotgun, but Slade was already moving. A single, deep crack from Slade's rifle echoed off the canyon walls like a bell tolling for a man already dead inside. Clayton's hand jerked, his own shot burying itself harmlessly in the dirt. Slade closed the distance with the calm rage of a man who had been holding back this fight for years. He didn't fire again. He dropped his rifle and drove his shoulder into Clayton's chest, knocking him backward with tremendous force. The fire licked closer as Clayton hit the ground with a scream. Slade pinned him, his forearm pressed across his throat. I should end you right here, he growled. Clayton spat blood, trying to form words. Slade tightened his grip, but a small hand touched his coat. It was Tessa. Let him go, she whispered. He'll come back. No, he won't. Slade looked down at Clayton, who was burned, broken, and wheezing in the dust. He'll have to carry what he did now, Tessa said with an old soul's wisdom. And that's worse. Sheriff Tate arrived not long after, drawn by the smoke curling into the twilight sky. He took one look at the cuffed and whimpering Clayton and didn't ask a single question. Tilda stood nearby, her arms crossed. Town heard everything, she said to Slade. You won't have to convince anyone. Slade gave her a single nod of acknowledgement. The next morning, the fire was out. Charred, smoking patches scarred the earth, but the cabin stood untouched. Mercy and her sisters slept in their basket by the hearth. Lena sat on the porch steps, her face turned toward the rising sun. She looked different, not healed, not whole, but anchored. Tessa brought her a cup of tea, then sat beside her, swinging her legs in the open air. "You still planning on leaving?" Slade asked quietly, stepping outside. Lena shook her head. "I don't think I ever really wanted to." Slade leaned against the porch post. "You'll be talked about." They were already talking. "I mean after this." She looked at him. "They'll forget." "No," he said. "They'll remember. But this time, they'll remember you standing." Lena smiled faintly. "That's fine. As long as they say my girl's names right after they say mine." Tessa was carving again, this time into the wood of the porch rail itself. Slowly, letter by letter, she etched the word Mercy. "I didn't think we'd get here," Lena whispered. "Not really." "You did," Slade said. "That's why you ran." She glanced at him. "Why did you open the door?" He didn't answer for a long moment. Then he said, "Because someone once closed it on my mother." I still remember the sound. Lena placed her hand on his. Rough met rough. Outside, the wind carried the scent of pine, and the first birds began to sing. The fence needed mending and the barn roof still leaked, but the world felt softer, as if it, too, had changed its name. Slade watched one of the babies yawn and stretch beneath Lena's gentle fingertips. "What will you tell them?" he asked. "About their first days." Lena looked down at her daughters, then up at the vast, open sky. "I'll tell them they were named by fire," she said. "And that the fire didn't burn them. It made them matter."